IVM.
There is no love greater than the love for food. But is doing business in food as lovable, fun, and exciting? When one decides to take the plunge to open a food business, what are the watchouts? The pandemic sent huge tremors in the F&B industry. We saw new ventures emerging in cloud kitchen, online ordering, and restaurants entering the delivery space. What will be the future of food? Will it be driven by food or technology? What is the role of an aggregator, an influencer, or a critic in this business? Last 2 years have been tough for everyone. What's not been talked enough is how leaders have proved their mettle during the pandemic. How can leaders better manage their mental health when it comes to leading from the trenches? Welcome to Speakeasy with Dheeraj Sinha. Today I'm talking to Gauri Devidayal, co-founder and CEO at Food Matters Group, which includes brands such as The Table Farm, Iktara, Misty Delivery, and more recently, Mac Street Cafe. Gauri was listed in Forbes India's 20 Leaders of Change, GQ's list of the 50 most influential young Indians, and Lux Book's top 50 women in Indian luxury. She is on the managing committee of the National Restaurant Association of India and on the Indian Advisory Board for Gleam Network, a global mentoring program for the F&B industry. Gauri, welcome to Speakeasy with Dheeraj Sinha.
Hey, thank you for having me. Great to be
And
here.
it's good. Yeah, it's so good to have you as a formal guest on the podcast.
I remember that. From guinea pig to like real pig.
So for people who don't know, I mean, my first trial podcast started with Gauri, right? And I wish we had recorded that. I'm sure we had recorded it, right? And I think that was a fun conversation. And that's what I think got me hooked.
I know. Yeah. I think ever since, first of all, it's great to be on the other side for a change and not have to deal with the stress of hosting. But it's fun. It's good to be back.
Yeah. So Gauri, I want to start with the most fascinating. I mean, there are many fascinating aspects about your journey, but the first fascinating aspect, which is, the shift from finance to food, right? And you and I have talked a lot about this, but I want to revisit the whole thing that, how did you decide to move from, being a bean counter to a food counter, so to say, and how was that journey like?
So, Dheeraj, honestly, it all happened a little accidentally. My husband, Jay, who wasn't my husband at that point, but, we were sort of dating seriously enough for me to poke my nose in his affairs. And, he started having this midlife crisis of wanting to open a restaurant, as all guys do, with absolutely no hospitality background whatsoever. And he sort of started venturing into it more and more seriously. And, I said, okay, look, I'll review the legal stuff. I'll help you set up the bank account, the company, do all the things that, I know how to do. And then you be on your way. And obviously, it never turned out that way. I sort of am obviously more of a nosy Parker than I thought. And I just started getting more and more involved in what he was doing. And it was obviously, super interesting, a new challenge, very exciting. This was back in 2009. And, the whole dining scene in Bombay was very different back then, right? So it was an interesting adventure he was embarking on. And and I just found myself getting sort of more and more involved to a point where it became, it was like having 2 full-time jobs. And obviously that was that was killing me. So I decided in a very sort of risk-averse way to take a 1-year sabbatical from my tax consulting job with KPMG at the time. And, I was like, okay, let me just dabble my fingers in this and check it out and see how it goes. And, the restaurant's about to turn 11 next month. So
amazing.
Yeah. So it's been a long sabbatical, so to speak.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how I got into it. And honestly, I think, having that legal and sort of tax background has been the biggest boon, honestly, in running this business. So I don't feel like it's, the switch has been more from being an employee to, I would say, employer.
Yeah.
And of course, the industry is completely different, but I still have a lot of, I still sort of have a lot of, my previous avatars still playing a role, a very big role in what we do today. And I think actually the hardest thing for me was, convincing not convincing, but sort of telling my parents I was giving up this great career path that I'd been on for a good, 9 years by then. I was sort of one step away from being a director. And I just was like, oh, by the way, I think I'm going to, change industries for a bit. And they thought I was completely crazy. And because both of us didn't really know anything about the industry, right? So, but yeah, I decided what have I got to lose in 1 year, taking a year off. So that's how it happened.
Yeah, and what an awesome journey, right? I mean,
totally.
11 years.
Yeah. I mean, it's this weird 11 years is actually the restaurant, which in fact took us 2 years to do. So it's almost been, I think, 13 years in this business. And it's one of those crazy things where there are days when you're just like, I'm done, I'm out of here. And every time we open something from that first restaurant, we're now 7 brands. And every single time, I promise you, every single time, we're like, this is the last one. And then it's this.
And then you go back and you do it again.
And you're just like, okay, one more idea. Come on, let's just do this. And then we're out of here. So I don't know when that's going to happen, but yeah.
We spoke about this, like in advertising, right? I mean, the joke is that stomach is our biggest organ because every advertising dream is that, one day I will retire and open a shack in Goa or, something. I mean, restaurant is the largest advertising dream, I would say.
Right? I don't get that. I really don't get it because it is the worst retirement plan ever. Yeah. I will bet my sort of bottom dollar on that for anyone who wants to say otherwise. I don't get it because this was exactly the same thing Jay thought. He was like, I've sold my business. He's a techie. Yeah. And, he was like, I'm done with San Francisco for now and I want to do something completely different and, I'll run it for 3 years and then I'll just chill. And the last thing we've done is chill,
Yeah.
I don't get it. I don't get why everyone thinks like opening a shack in Goa or whatever is the best retirement plan. Because I don't think I've ever worked as hard as I have, even today. So, yeah.
It's not that you can empty your own bar on yourself.
No,
every day.
It really isn't. And there's only so many times you can eat in your own restaurant as well. So,
Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you about, you've obviously been at the cutting edge of innovation in this category, right? I mean, you've opened so many restaurants, always played with formats, cuisines, and so on and so forth. So how do you stay ahead of the game in this space? I mean, what do you do to stay ahead of the game? And how much do you say, okay, let me be innovative? And how much do you say, okay, let me be conservative? Because, change is also about being at the right degree of change. You change too much and you're out of the circuit, and you change too little and you're too boring. So talk to us about innovation. How do you stay ahead of the game and how do you calibrate with some examples on how to get it right?
I think it's a combination of things. Firstly, timing has a lot to do with it, right?
Yeah.
So like I said, 11, 12 years ago, when we started conceptualizing the restaurant, there was a huge sort of gap, I guess, that needed to be filled. It was like a huge gaping hole. And so honestly, anything that we would have done would have sort of been, I guess, something different because there really wasn't that much happening in the standalone dining space 10, 12 years ago. But I think more than that, when it comes to sort of innovation, and we've never really thought about it in that sense and said, oh, we want to do something that's different. We want to, be different for the sake of it. Or it's not really that. I think what's worked for us is that everything we've done has stemmed from, Jay and me being our own consumer and finding something not finding something that we want rather. So for example, we're not the first sort of pizza delivery brand, right? But last year we launched a pizza delivery brand called Mac Street Toppings. And, why did we do that? Because we really felt that there wasn't a great pizza delivery brand out there that was generous with toppings, had like really high quality ingredients, and, traveled well, was sort of all these things. So it's not, and I think this is coming back to your question of like, how much are you innovating and how little are you innovating, right?
Yes.
So like I said, we're not the first pizza brand, but we've tweaked, I guess, the experience a little bit to something that we felt was lacking when we wanted to order in, right? When it came to the table, it was a very different situation. Like I said, there was very little happening in the standalone dining space. And we had both just returned from overseas. I had come back from London. Jay had just returned from San Francisco. Both have an amazing dining scene happening there. And we were just like, why is that not here?
Yeah.
Even a small amount of that, why is that experience not here? And that's where, with the table, we were able to, and it was our first venture. We were really crazy kids. We kind of didn't have a business plan in place. And, it was very much a sort of, cliched as this may sound, a very much a passion-driven project where we were like, we just want to get this right. We'll figure out the numbers. The numbers will fall into place, when we get it right. So let's focus on getting it right. And that's where these concepts of like the community table, or an ingredient driven menu, which everyone was like, what is this? What is it? Italian? Is it European? Is it continental? And we were like, no, it's ingredient driven. It's not, it's cuisine agnostic. And everyone was like, well, what does that mean? And and at the risk of sort of alienating diners to some extent, we took those chances because that's the food we loved and that's what we knew best. And even with the community table, which is now obviously sort of you see that more often in restaurants, it was always the last seat to be filled in the restaurant. Like everyone was like, I don't want to sit next to a random person, I want my own private table. And today it is the most sought after seat in the restaurant. So it's just, I think it was something that we loved the idea of. We loved, and having lived abroad where you might be out alone and you might be sort of, you want to be dining, you might be dining alone, but you don't want to feel alone. And you're sitting at a community table and it's a great feeling. Like you can still, and you might meet people. And I've met some fab people just sitting over there by myself with, having a drink. And that's the amazing thing. So I knew I'd experienced this elsewhere. I know that, at that time, Bombay wasn't sort of maybe open to this kind of concept, but we were like, hey, let's do it. We've got a blank slate. Let's do what we really want to do and see where the chips fall. And that's kind of how we approached it. Right. So, but I think if again, coming back to your question, it's really about where we felt there was a gap for ourselves and addressing that and just doing it really well or not doing it at all. And that's just been our sort of, I guess, motto throughout the last few years.
Yeah. And the way I see it in retrospect, right, I think you've just been a little ahead of the curve and therefore that's helped, right? So it's been new and fresh, but it's just a little bit ahead. So it's not too far away. So you're saying, the idea of community dining now is a central idea. Right?
Having said that, Dheeraj, I think there's been an occasion where we did sort of maybe go too far too early.
Yeah, but what was that? Let's talk about that.
So we had a restaurant called Misty, which was a Southeast Asian inspired restaurant, in Burmese, Vietnamese food. And so we opened that about 3 years ago. I feel like that could have been slightly ahead of its time. I don't know how sort of palatable the very sort of light, clean flavors of Vietnamese food are for, an Indian palate. And, just in terms of, we wanted to create a very adult experience with our cocktail program. We, in fact, launched it saying that we didn't allow kids post 7 p.m. and, things like that. And that all kind of backfired, right? So I think in that sense, that's one of the examples of where we were probably, pushing too many buttons too quickly. But an amazing learning experience for me personally, because, that's exactly what we learned, that, how far to go with what, and, what the city is ready for and not. So, I completely agree with you that you really have to understand the pulse of your audience when you're sort of planning.
Yeah, and on food especially, right? Food, I think the familiarity is notorious, right? you keep going back to comfort and you keep going back to the palette that you're familiar with. So
Absolutely.
you are in a category where innovation is difficult. It has to be rightly pegged. Otherwise, you can go too far too soon.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk to you about this whole idea of cloud kitchens and online and delivery, especially spiked by pandemic, right? I mean, a lot of restaurants, a lot of people at that point in time, and there's also a huge amount of money chasing that business, right? We work with some of those guys as well, where it's all driven by investment banking money in that sense. So what's happening there? You've in fact ventured into that through Iktara. How's that going? And is that a totally different ball game, Gauri, than running a brick and mortar restaurant? What are the learnings there that we can gain from?
So a couple of things actually. We now have more delivery brands than we have dine-in brands, ironically.
Wow. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
So we have
Amazing.
4 delivery brands, 3 of which, 2 of which came are pandemic babies, and 2 of which sort of happened just before the pandemic and, obviously got a big boost during the whole lockdown. And so it's very interesting because Iktara, is our Indian delivery brand, which you mentioned just now. We launched that at the end of February. So literally about 3 weeks before all the madness ensued. And funnily enough, while our restaurants were sort of in dire straits, the Iktara business really took off. And the same thing happened with our bakery. So we have a bakery brand called Mac Street Bread Co., which previously only supplied to it was a B2B brand. So the idea was to supply breads to other cafes and restaurants in the city. And obviously that entire clientele shut down overnight. And so we switched to a retail model, a B2C model with the same product. And I think for, several operational reasons, we had an advantage of being able to get up and running very early into the lockdown, which just took this business onto a completely different trajectory that we'd never sort of anticipated for it. And so in that sense, it actually worked out really well for us. But doing all of this in a lockdown, when delivery, B2C delivery was just not our sort of strong point, was a nightmare. It's a completely different mindset from a dine-in. Dine-in is about the experience. It's not just about, the F&B on your plate. It's really a very different mindset that you're catering to. Delivery, on the other hand, is, like you said, it's about comfort. It's about someone you have no control about you have very limited control on how they're going to have it, experience the food at home, wherever they're having it. So, there it's more about, with delivery, it's more about logistics. It's about packaging. It's about, the menu even. You can't just say, oh, my restaurant's shut, so I'll just switch to delivering from it. It's a different, when you create a menu, and especially, at least in the case of our brands like The Table, where the menu is intended to be eaten freshly prepared, plated. It's sort of very elaborate preparation. It doesn't travel well. It's not meant to be reheated. So it's not something that we could just switch on a delivery and be like, okay, let's get by on delivery. So when it comes to sort of creating a cloud kitchen delivery brand, you're sort of thinking very differently. You're thinking about someone who is going to reheat the food in many different ways, including a microwave. They could be eating this in their jammies, watching TV. So it needs to be comforting and, not sort of where you're having to think of 10 things and it has to taste good, right? It has to travel well. So it's a really different mindset when you're looking at delivery brands. And yes, you're right. Of course, I would say about 5% of our business used to come from delivery earlier. And now it's probably close to sort of, 45% of our business.
God.
Yeah.
Oh, that's huge.
And of course, what happened as a result of that was that, so this restaurant I mentioned earlier, Miss T, which we closed about 2 years ago, we felt the menu was great. So we were like, look, we've got this menu, let's launch it as a delivery brand, which is what we did. And that took off really well as well. And then we launched the pizza brand that I mentioned earlier in about a year ago. So again, we had this space. We thought, hey, we've got we also, a lot of restaurants had closed down and, there were some great chefs looking for work. We were like, we've got the space. We've kind of figured out the logistics now. So, let's do it. And like I mentioned earlier, we felt there were some gaps in the market. So we tapped into that. And now we have 4 delivery brands. So it's really interesting. It's definitely here to stay. But you're right. It's a different mindset. It's a different operation completely. And, you mentioned the aggregators. It's interesting. It's an interesting sort of relationship that we have with them where, you need them, but at the same time, you don't want to be dependent on them. And, cloud kitchens are the most scalable business, right? So they're highly scalable. So, of course, this is why this funding in this space is going nuts right now. And it's amazing. I mean, brands which have been around just a few years are now commanding $100 million valuations.
Yes.
There's a biryani brand that's
yes.
And it's amazing. So it's obviously, a space to watch. But I think that just, again, coming back to the point about the aggregators, I think, and I've been really vocal about this, in the last 1 year where delivery's been such a mainstay for us. We definitely need the aggregators. They're not going anywhere. We need them to kind of help us get the word out about our brands. And we sort of ask our clientele is that, once you've discovered us, come and order directly from us. And we launched this whole order direct campaign around that. So it's such a different, value proposition from dine-in, but it's interesting. And I think, just to kind of sum it all up for us in the last 2 years, it was the best way for us to hedge our business because restaurants kept being sort of asked to open and close. And so when, one was down, the other one obviously was up. And that's what I kind of see happening, this sort of hybrid dine-in and delivery model being sort of adopted by most restaurateurs now given the sort of volatility of the environment we're operating in.
Yeah. And the way I see it, right, I feel that dining is about food and about the experience that you create within those 4 walls, right? And delivery, I feel, is a lot about data and technology, right?
Absolutely.
It is about...
It's not even about the food after a point.
Yes,
it's really about data. Yeah.
Yeah. And how well we know the consumer and how can you use that data? And,
I mean, I'm pretty sure that's what these valuations are stemming from because they're not exactly profitable businesses right now.
And technology and how can you deliver that through technology and so on and so forth, right?
But that's what one of the biggest battles is on, right? About who owns the data.
Who owns the data? Absolutely. And that's where the future lies, right? And there's so much to learn from when you own your own customer data, right? And if you don't have access to that, then it's a tough one. And I know, I have a couple of other friends in this business and they all want to own the customer data because that's how you innovate. That's how you cater to the taste. You lose that, you lose pretty much the premise of your whole business.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, right? Because we've always thought of ourselves as a food and beverage business. And I think that's shifting, right? We're firstly having to become more tech savvy, which we didn't really ever have to do to this extent before. And data has become as much of a sort of, commodity as the food and beverage itself. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it's changing dramatically. We will take a quick break and come back and we'll probe a little bit more on how things are changing at your end, Gauri.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On The Wire Talks, it's all about the Beatles. Oliver Krasky, author and freelance editor who has closely worked with the famous band in the past, tells Siddharth why they're so loved even today. On All Things Policy, the folks at the Takshashila Institute discuss Russia's motives, why it's insecure with the G2, and the logic behind its growing alliance with China. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam is joined by Nikhil Agarwal. He is the co-founder and CEO of Grip Invest, and they discuss the working of lease and inventory finance in India. The Simplified Gang speaks to author Suman Srivastava about her new book, Don't Beg, Inspire. And on the Filter Coffee podcast, Surya Swapna, founder of Kathavani, talks to Karthik about mythological storytelling for children. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Go check out our YouTube channels. We go live on a whole bunch of different things. We have a number of different channels. You can find them on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week. Cred, Bank of Baroda, CoinSwitch Kuber, Intel, and Oxfam India. Thank you for making this possible.
So, Gauri, welcome back. I wanted to discuss with you how things are now that, there's a kind of an opening up post pandemic, right? Do you feel that behaviors are changing? Do you feel like, for example, there's some kind of revenge shopping, or there's a huge surge? For example, I was looking for some place for the year end and everything is booked out, right? I mean, and I've been traveling a lot this week, and airports are looking like, they're like fully crowded. So there is some bit of a return with vengeance of people post pandemic. What are you seeing in your business? I mean, are patterns changing? Are there any notable changes there?
You're absolutely right about this, and we are experiencing the revenge eating happening, or the
Nice.
revenge
Yeah.
dining out. And we thought that it would be short-lived just after everything opened up, but thankfully, it's kind of gone on. It's a combination of things, right? So a lot of people's travel plans have been hampered, and
Yeah.
I guess there are more people. Usually, like Diwali and that whole time is a real sort of quiet time for restaurants because everyone's kind of celebrating at home. And but I think these last few months have been sort of, I'm grateful for the buzz coming back. And in terms of dining habits, I wouldn't say I wouldn't say that's changed too much in terms of what people want. They've come back craving what they used to have before
Yeah.
the lockdown. So of course, there's been a lot of innovation. There are a lot more new restaurants opening. And of course, people are trying them out, and which is great. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of people just came back because of, the sort of what they missed. But I think one thing for sure is that people are more conscious of, getting value. And I don't just mean financially. If they're making that effort to step out, considering everything that's going on, they want to make sure that it's going to be good. And good in terms of an experience, good in terms of value for money, all of that. So it's definitely made people a little more discerning. And it's also made, I think, restaurants conscious of not sort of getting away with anything. So I hope that stays and just makes everyone better at what they're doing and offering. So
Yeah. And do you simultaneously see a blip in the ordering in, or is that
of
continuing
course.
There
Yeah,
is it?
for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, it's not died, but it's definitely
Yeah.
reduced, which is expected. It's to be
Yeah.
expected. Yeah.
So the one is compensating for the other.
Yeah, which is what I
pretty
meant
much.
earlier in terms of the whole hedging of,
Yeah.
revenues from one and the other. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, Gauri, we see a lot of influencer is the key word in 2021, right? So everybody's an influencer, and everybody with any following is a content creator. So there are lots of food critics as well, right? Who've come on the picture and so on and so forth. What's your sense or experience with them? I mean, are they helping the game? Are they a nuisance you would rather not have?
You're just trying to get me into trouble. I'm not falling for this one. No, look, in all seriousness, there is a reason that, they exist. And there's a reason that, restaurants kind of cater to them and need them. I think, it's important to distinguish between brand awareness and brand endorsement. And this is where I feel that, influencers do have a role to play in building awareness about a brand. But I feel that when it comes to sort of, I guess, deciding or concluding about a brand, that should really be left to the consumer to figure out once they've experienced it for themselves. Because let's face it, I mean, if you've sent something, free, or you've sort of wined or dined an influencer, they're unlikely to say anything negative, even if they experience that. So I feel that, it's really down to the consumer to use their judgment on what they take from an influencer's sort of post or critique or whatever it is. But I definitely think it's great for building brand awareness.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think our learning on using celebrities and influencers is exactly the same, right? So increasingly, we're not hiring celebrities as endorsers of the brands. I don't want a celebrity to say, Anil Kapoor to come and say, use Spotify because I'm using it. But we are using them for their awareness. So, for example, say for Spotify, we just did an education campaign using Deepika Padukone, right? And she was cast as a celebrity just to get visibility and velocity with 100 million
Absolutely.
consumers, right? And the job of that campaign is just for people to get them to switch to Spotify and check for themselves
Yeah,
whether
exactly.
it works for them. So we are also using influencers and celebrities as media multipliers, if you like, or velocity creators rather than endorsers. And partly, I mean, they also are good actors, so they help in storytelling.
Yeah. No, but I think then that's the whole point, that I think as you and, in the ad space, us as sort of a brand, we might be aware of it. I think the key thing is for consumers to be able to distinguish between an awareness campaign and sort of an endorsement. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I wanted to discuss a bit with you on the leadership aspects, right? Because I know you're pretty active on LinkedIn, and I keep, some very interesting posts, which I love as well. All right. And you've always emphasized the idea of being a mentor and giving back and so on and so forth, right? And you are associated with Gleam India, and you're mentoring people in the F&B sector, right? So with people who are wanting to get into this space and this category, right? And one is obviously this whole thing that you feel is very glamorous from outside. Like people feel that, in advertising, it's all fun and frolic all the time. I mean, they don't really understand how much hard work goes into making one piece of ad, how much strategy, insight, and so on and so forth we put behind. So similarly, your industry is as well, the images of a founder sitting at a table and having a margarita. Right. So what are the few learnings you'd like to give the younger people getting in or having gotten into the category by themselves?
So, first of all, I want to just say that, anyone who has the opportunity to have a mentor, grab it with like everything you've got, because it's something that I know if I had back, in the day, I think I would have made a sort of fewer mistakes and saved a little more maybe. So, I think it's, it's great to have insight from people who've spent time in the industry, or even if they're not industry mentors, it could be about running your business. It could be, because all of this is new, right? So when you're getting into the F&B sector, you could also be an entrepreneur for the first time. And that comes with its like sort of share of, sort of challenges. And it's just really great to have someone who can kind of, maybe guide you, I guess, through it. So firstly, I just want to say that. But when it comes to, what I would like to sort of convey to mentees, the first thing is what you just pointed out, which is that it's not all the glam and sham that it looks. It's the glam is a sham. It's maybe like 5% of what actually goes into this business. And, of course, that's what you see on the face of it. But, there is so much. It's like that, that sort of duck on the water where it's sort of paddling away like mad underneath. And it really is that. And especially in the F&B business, because it's 24/7, right? So you don't say, oh, the restaurant's closed on the weekends. And it's a Monday to Friday job. It's quite the contrary. And you just can't. It's 365 days. So you cannot switch off from it. And you need to, it is a great industry, much as I sort of joke about wanting to get out of it occasionally.
Yes, I know what you mean.
It is a great industry to be a part of, but all I would say is that go into it with open eyes. And in order to do that, I always sort of recommend getting some work experience in the industry before venturing into your own business, because it's a couple of things. There's a couple of main reasons that people get into it. One is that what we talked about right in the beginning, which is that, I want to sort of retire with a little cafe, a cute little cafe somewhere, or I want to have my like beach shack or whatever it is. It's really not that simple. And then a lot of people are like, oh, if this one's doing it, I can do the same thing cheaper, or I can do the same thing better. Hey, look, everyone has the same idea, and that they can do it better and cheaper. And it's really not that straightforward. So I just would always sort of recommend someone, trying something out in a, either joining an existing business and, getting that experience, or, just sort of not plunging into the F&B entrepreneurial space without really knowing what you're getting into.
Yeah. And what, Gauri, would you say would be the key success factors? What are 2 or 3 things which make a lot of difference between whether you'll succeed or whether you'll fail?
Okay. So one thing is always budget for more than what you budget for.
Very important. Very
it's like
important. Yes.
if you've budgeted for 6 months of working capital, make that like 18 months, because it is one of those. And I can't speak for other industries. I'm sure this happens a lot, but it's one of those that you will never, ever, ever end up within your budget. So just keep a buffer for a lot more. The other thing is, it's sort of, our industry is notorious for starting out with a bang and then kind of slowly fizzling out, right? So everyone has this honeymoon period when they open a new restaurant and everyone's going and you're like, okay, I've nailed it. I'm sort of the new kid on the block and it's all great. But I think sustaining it is what's really key. And that comes from, maintaining your quality. So the reason I mentioned about having this buffer of, a budget of a sort of, a buffer to see you through longer is that there will be things that, may not go to plan. And it's very easy to start cutting corners at that point to continue running the business. And you don't want to start doing that because that's exactly when the downfall begins. So I think just, it's a really capital intense business. It is that. So again, go into knowing that and be prepared for that. And, I think, when it comes to F&B, it's really quality, quality, quality. So it doesn't matter whether you're like, you're like a dhaba or you're a fine dining restaurant. The quality and the consistency is what's going to see you through. Because at the end of the day, people are coming back because they enjoyed something. So they want to come back and taste that they enjoyed. They don't want to come back and have a version of it, So it's really important in our business, I think quality, consistency, and, just being smart about your sort of financial buffer is
I think that's very sharp. Gauri, we spoke a lot about pain of entrepreneurship, right? What are the joys? What are the times that you look back and tell yourself, wow, this is not bad, it's going well. What are some of the joys of building these restaurants?
When I'm not in the red, when my P&L is positive. Look, I think, it's probably the same across the board in any industry. But I think just, every year that we sort of celebrate and continue to exist is a sign that something is going right. And, that comes from sort of a multitude of factors, right? There's your team and, having a great team that sort of wants to stick it out with you and wants to be with you and wants to grow with you.
Yeah.
You feel like, okay, I must be doing something right to sort of have them be with us. And especially in our business, having good team members is critical because we're in the business of hospitality. It's not just about F&B. It's about hospitality, and hospitality comes down to your people. So I think, for me, having a lower turnover of team members is a great sort of endorsement of what we're doing. Of course, there's the sort of financial success of it. And I think the biggest thing for me is when, I get messages from people and just, I hear, or my mother, who was like very cynical about me switching careers, now very proudly goes and says, yeah, the table is my daughter and son-in-law's restaurant.
Nice.
So I think those are the things where, you just feel like, okay, you must have done something right. And and, especially in the last 2 years where it's really been sort of a shitty time. And whenever, we've been closed and then reopened, I don't think people are faking that sort of euphoria of wanting to come back. And I just feel like that sort of rush of love that comes is just really like more than any money in the world. It's what keeps you going.
Yeah. In my business, when the ad comes back through your mother's WhatsApp group.
What is it with getting mother's approval? Guys, we have to get out of this.
Everywhere. Mom, look, I did it. The other thing, Gauri, is that, there's huge amount of euphoria with new age businesses, startups scaling up in India, right? Valuations, and IPO, and so on and so forth. Where are you on that? Are you going to give Falguni Nayar the next billionaire women from India? Are
Oh
you going to
God,
go for an IPO?
I hope so. No, listen, never stop dreaming, right?
Of
Look,
course.
I think it's interesting that you asked this because something that I've seen, and I'm speaking very much from our business perspective, our specific business, and not across the board, but with a certain in especially in the premium space, which is what I think our restaurants kind of fall
Yes.
into, scale is almost counterproductive to
Yes.
quality, right? And so it's a really difficult situation that we find ourselves in, because you, of course, at some point want to realize the value of the goodwill that you've built, and the brand, but without compromising on that quality, right? And also, just being able to let go of what your vision, and trusting someone else with that, if they were to come in and kind of run operations, is a huge challenge. So I think that, having said that, you have to be smart about what it is that you can scale in your business and what it is that you can't. And just coming back to our example, we recently opened a cafe in place of the restaurant that was Misty. And that's something that we definitely see opening more
Yes.
of, but on the other hand, the table is
Yes.
unlikely to be something that
Yeah.
we see more of, right? So you have to kind of figure that out and be smart about it. And that's also kind of the reason why our business has, like, our particular sort of company has, the brands have kind of scaled laterally as opposed to
Yeah.
in volume.
Yeah.
So now we have 7 brands, and they're
Yes.
all completely different, and
Yeah.
that's where our sort of business growth has happened. So yes, at some point we'll stop creating these brands and look at what can be scaled. But I think it's okay to sort of think about your business differently. And also the other thing is that IPOs and sort of private equity investment and whatever isn't always necessarily the way out, right? I mean, you don't have to fall into that trap of saying, okay, I need to do something where I'm going to get in private equity investment and get out. Like, you really, and especially with this business, which really can like drain you dry, you have to continue to enjoy what you're doing. And so you have to be very careful of finding that balance between the money, the scale, and being true to what your vision, really. So I mean, it's funny, we've actually, for the first time in whatever 12 or 13 years of it being Jay and me, we've just hired our first sort of external professional management employee. So there's definitely progress happening on that front of bringing in new blood and growing the team, because hey, we can't just the two of us run this as a mom and pop shop forever. But I think there's no timetable for doing it, and you have to figure out what works for you.
Yeah. And the way I see it, you're building more a house of brands rather than one brand scaled up, 10x.
And not everything works everywhere, right? So within your portfolio, there could be things that work in like, certain cities, and some things that work in other cities, and, or within the same city. So, you really, you sort of have to figure out what works for you, really.
Yeah. You can't really, I get you. I mean, you're saying you can't really run this out of an Excel sheet. It's not as cut and dry. It's finally about the soul and the food and the experience. You can't divorce it from there.
Yeah. And it's a very different mindset, right? Because a lot of times with scale, you'd say, okay, I'll open 10, and I'm very open to the fact that like 4 of them might shut down, but 6 will survive. And that's the model that you work on. And so it's it's funny, like on I remember when I was chatting with someone on my show, they said this thing to me, which I've never forgotten, which is that the person who creates the brands is not necessarily the best person to scale them up.
Yes.
And that's how I see us in a way, right? Like, we know how to create the product, but taking it places may be someone else's strength.
Sure. No, absolutely. And my last question, Gauri, we feel, at least for the moment, that we are coming out of the tunnel, a fairly dark tunnel, right? It's been tough. Even personally, for example, there's been so much of conversation around mental health of employees and people. And I'm like, what about mental health of leaders, right? It's been tough. It's been tough running companies and stuff like that, to make sure that, salaries are there on the table and so on and so forth. What have been your learnings through the pandemic? One or two things that you're taking away with you?
So right off the bat, when everything started kind of going downhill last year, I think our biggest thing was that, being really upfront and honest with our team, because we didn't know what was happening, right? So instead of like pretending or just, sort of pacifying people with sort of, vagueness, we were just constantly in communication with them and very honest about, whatever it is that we knew or what, we had planned. And I think that was actually really appreciated by people. So, sometimes you don't feel comfortable doing that because you're afraid of the backlash, or you're afraid of, people upping and quitting or whatever because they don't like what you're saying. But I think that in the long term, actually people respect that honesty and they trust you. And that was, I think the first thing that we did. I think the second thing was that, in the context of what's happened in the last year or so, is that this wasn't purely a business decision, right? About, should we do this? Should we do that? It was very much a humanitarian issue, right? And those sort of key decisions that we made about, what we would operate, what we wouldn't operate, how we would do it, was very much done with the people concerned. So it wasn't something that we decided behind closed doors, at a very high level, and then just informed our team and said, well, this is what you're going to be doing. It was very much sort of a group decision where everyone was in agreement and on board with it. And I think that was important to make it happen, really. And I think the third thing was just empathy, right? Because we live in a very different scenario from a lot of the people who actually make this show run, and understanding what their concerns and fears were, which may not have been something we had to concern ourselves with personally, was so critical to then being able to address that and then move forward. Because until you've addressed that, you can't really expect them to, think about anything else. Yeah. And I think those were just the key sort of principles that we applied to whatever the situation was, whether it was about reopening or closing, or whether people should, go back to their hometowns or come back from their hometowns or, whatever it was. So I think that, you have to have that ability to be sort of, put yourself in their shoes in a situation like this, especially, and also just be nimble to not apply maybe your management sort of techniques that you were using in a different scenario. So I think that, the team felt like they were part of a team, and that's, I think why they really came through for us. And I think personally, I would say that I was sort of, it was also a factor of there being like very little manpower, but like I was there with them at work every day, right from April last year. And, I wasn't kind of just saying to them, okay, you go put your life on the line, but I'm going to be sitting in my little bubble in quarantine and, not stepping out. And it not only like reassured them that we were taking obviously the right measures, which were safe for them, but also for me. And it also reassured actually, our customers, right? Because they knew that, we weren't just saying, oh, it's all safe in the kitchen. I was there, and I was kind of, I wouldn't be just doing it for the sake of. So I think it's just about, putting your mouth where your money is, and or the other way around. But and I think that's basically what really worked for us.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's all about leading from the front. Right. When we opened offices, we've been right there in the center of. In fact, every office we opened, I went there personally to open it, because you have to be right in the front. These days are not about being behind. You have to be out there in the trenches. I think the culture gets built in the trenches. The culture doesn't get built on some HR initiative.
Absolutely.
That's an amazing conversation once again, Gauri. And at this point, we turn the mic around on this podcast, and we have this rapid fire round where you get to shoot questions at me.
Oh,
hopefully
fun.
Not tough ones.
It gets better and better.
We just take a quick break and we come back, and the mic is all yours.
Eventually, you'll see the end of your childhood,
Get accustomed to womanhood.
enjoy the experience of sisterhood,
Might get to wifehood
or not, choose motherhood,
or not. You'll learn to define your personhood.
earn a livelihood,
Change the neighborhood.
and get rid of the falsehood that life post academia is easy.
So join me, Ritasha,
And me, Ayushi,
on a journey from station starting point.
to station, what now?
Next station, Pudin station, and hopefully, Agla station, adulthood.
Fresh episodes out every Thursday.
Hey, welcome back, Dheeraj, to your own show.
Thank you.
I'm going to take over the questioning now. And of course, as you can expect, mine is going to be all about food and eating and cooking and dining. So here goes.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to dine with any celebrity, who would that be?
I don't know. I would, any of people like, say, Malcolm Gladwell or Adam Grant or Simon Sinek. For me, the conversation is very, very important, right? So is the food. but I think food and conversation together is my twin peaks. So it'll be either of those people, I would say.
Okay, sounds good. If you were asked to cook dinner at home, what would your menu be?
Grill. So we have this nice charcoal grill, and I think I do a good job of that. All kinds of stuff, from corn cob to chicken to everything else. It would be grill.
Amazing.
I think it also kind of elongates time, right? So it
It's
becomes,
it's also harder to get wrong, right? With
yes.
and I'm with you on that one.
Yeah.
So an extension of that, though, then if you were to start a restaurant, what cuisine would it serve?
It's a tough one, right? I mean, I would suddenly begin to apply my brains on what should I be doing, right? Maybe Bihari food. I don't know, because I'm from Bihar, and I don't know if that cuisine and culture has been explored enough. So I would do something which is slightly more interesting, Indian, local. That would be my zone. So Bihari food or stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay. So what would you pick? Brunch by the beach at Cannes or dim sums at a tea house in Singapore?
Both. Can I have both? Because we've
No.
not been traveling. It's a tough one, right? See, I mean, to my mind, Cannes is never about food, right? Cannes is always about the rosé and the people.
And
meeting people, friends you've not met. But yeah, dim sums in a tea house in Singapore looks like my comfort food. Looks like my khichdi.
Okay.
Yeah.
And last but not least, ad man or podcast host, what are you loving more at the moment?
I'm honestly loving the podcast piece, because if you look at this, Gauri, right, last 18 months, there's very little that we've invested in ourselves as leaders, right? There's really been no time. I've been working like round the clock, making sure we are clicking in revenue, clients are happy, they're not porting out, people are happy. We gave up our office, so we're building a new office. So selecting chairs and tiles and all of that, it's been like really, really tough, right? I mean, in the morning, you feel like a plumber, in the evening, you or on an Excel sheet, right? So the podcast is that 1 hour of conversation that I want to have, right, with people that I want to talk to. So it's that drink out that you would do. That's what it's become for me, and I'm really loving this.
Great. Well, I feel you there. And listen, that's enough of putting you on the hot seat. But thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun, and I can see that you're totally a natural. So yeah, thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Gauri, for being here. It's always an amazing conversation. So great to have you on the show.
Great.
And Gauri, for our listeners who are listening to us, for them to connect with you, to write their comments to you, could you tell us your social handle that they can write to you at?
Sure. So I'm, I think, most active on Instagram, which is at Gauri Devidayal, and on Twitter at Gauri Details, spelled Gauri. And that's probably the best 2 ways to reach me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gauri.
Thank you.
In advertising, the joke is that the stomach is our biggest organ. And every advertising person's retirement plan is to open a shack in Goa and chill. Gauri gives us a reality check that may seem all glitz and glamour on the outside, but on the inside, it is a tough 24/7 job and is far away from being a retirement dream. Being in business for the last 13 years, she tells us the importance of understanding the pulse of your audience. And in the business of food, she says that timing is everything. One needs to keep recognizing the need gaps on the go, address them with innovative solutions, and that's been her motto for the last few years. Gauri looks at the new age Instagram and YouTube food critics as influencers who can endorse and create awareness for a brand. However, the decision and the judgment is best left to the customers based on their experience, she says. It is important to distinguish between brand and awareness and brand judgment, according to Gauri. And finally, the hybrid food model is here to stay. Restaurants need both online efficiency and offline experience to be able to maximize their potential. Well, those were my learnings from today's conversation. What were yours? What thoughts did this conversation trigger in your mind? Do tag me on my Twitter handle Dheeraj_Sinha or leave your comments at speakeasywithdheerajsinha.com. If you like this podcast, you can explore other amazing podcasts on the IVM Podcast app and website. You can follow them on social media at IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for listening.
Don't you think that if everyone around you is getting smart, you better be smarter? Hey there, I'm the traveling professor Siddharth Deshmukh and I'm back with season 2 of my podcast to make you smarter. Smarter with Sid. What's this season's focus about? Well, it's about 10-minute nuggets that will make you stand out at work. It's time to go from smart to smarter. Tune in every Tuesday and Thursday and become smarter with Sid.
सफर, रास्ते, मंजिल और मुकाम अक्सर ये हमसे कुछ कहना चाहते हैं, पर हम हैं कि अपनी रोजमर्रा की जिंदगी में इन्हें सुनने से कतराते हैं। नमस्ते दोस्तों, मेरा नाम है केशव चतुर्वेदी और मैं आपको ले चलूंगा कुछ ऐसे सफर पर जहां आपको एक नया नजरिया मिलेगा सफर और मंजिलों को देखने का। आइए इन किस्से कहानियों में डूब जाएं। हर मंगलवार और शुक्रवार